Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship podcast interview. Very excited to bring in the longtime color analyst on Longhorns broadcasts, the one and only Roger Wallace. Roger, how you doing?
Hey, good to see you, Chip. I dressed up for you, man. I'm happy to be with you.
Listen, I appreciate that. You should be able to roll out of bed
My
and
pleasure.
join us, and we'll just talk ball like we're hanging out at the sports bar. You know what I'm saying?
I just noticed the one thing you can see here are my boxing gloves, and that's probably sport number 95 on my list of expertise. But yeah, those are some.
Well,
boxing
tell us about
gloves.
those boxing gloves,
Well,
Roger.
my wife a long time ago decided that I needed kind of that old historic kind of sports motif in my little office here, and so she is great at finding cool stuff at places you wouldn't normally look, and she found some boxing gloves. She's got some old wooden skis and old wooden tennis rackets, but the boxing gloves are the ones. Here, can I show you something really cool though, Chip?
Oh, yeah.
I'll show you
Yeah,
something.
most wives are looking to junk all that stuff. So
Yeah, so I can't zoom, but because I see your VY picture of the Sports Illustrated. So you see the VY picture there?
yeah.
So I saw that in a store at Barton Creek Mall, and I was just kind of looking at it. And then I looked at it again, and you can't see it because you can't zoom in. But I can see in the background the silhouette, because I was a sideline reporter for UT Radio then with Craig and Keith, and you can see the silhouette of me. And I've got a mic here, like I'm ready to talk. Like they're going to go to me as Vince is scoring the national championship clinching touchdown. But anyway, so that's why we got it because you can kind of see in the background. And the reason I could tell, I had a black jacket on, but the credential kind of was white. So that's pretty cool.
How about that?
Yeah.
That's and that, I mean, that is easily okay. You've been at KXAN now. How many years?
27 in April.
27 years. And where does that rank? Where does that championship football game rank?
Well, it's number one. As far as professionally, the 08 experience, the 08 Beijing Olympics, so many events, but for one singular moment, it was the national championship game, no doubt about it.
All right, Roger, wanted to get you on to talk a little UT basketball, baseball, a couple thoughts on spring football. So let's start with UT basketball because they're getting ready to head off to Kansas City for the Big 12 tournament. And Texas basketball year one under Chris Beard. Early impressions on your end?
It's been an unusual, and I'll defer to you too, but for the sake of the question, because they had to get Beard, and they got Beard. And then, there was so much buzz around all the transfers he got. And I think he knew deep down it was going to be tough, even though collectively it looked pretty amazing what he was able to assemble. All those guys were either their leading scorer or one of their top scorers at their programs. But now you got to bring them together, play his style. And usually it's, you have a core at the school and you bring in a few guys to mix in. And it was almost, the other way around. You had a few guys that were remaining, key guys, Andrew Jones, Cordy Ramey, Jace Febris, and Brock Cunningham, but they have to mix in with new guys who didn't play with each other, who didn't get coached by Chris Beard. It was just a really weird dynamic. And I think, you could look at it both ways. I think, what they've done is really impressive trying to put that together. And I think the 30,000-foot view you hear people say is he's done a really good job with that. I think the micro view is, there was so many expectations early on that the ranking was ridiculous early on. I think most people would agree. And then, so I don't know. I think it's an incomplete. I think they could still win a couple games in the tournament. But the moments, Chip, think about the moments. What have they been? They go to Gonzaga. That was a hornet's nest. I don't think anybody's going to win that night. Compound the fact that that was right after the football game against Kansas. So already Longhorn fans aren't real happy. And then they turn on the late game against Gonzaga, and Gonzaga jumped on them early. And then you think about the other moments, and that was the trip to Tech here, Baylor here to close down the Irwin Center. The one big one was when Rick Barnes came, and that nearly got away from them. In Tennessee, they've had some really good wins, but I think those kind of get lost. Think about going to TCU and winning by 23. We think TCU is a pretty good team, maybe a tournament team. So maybe they're not getting credit for the things they did well, and the memorable moments, unfortunately for them, they've been on the wrong side of most of them.
Well, and if they go to the Big 12 tournament, beat TCU, most likely face Kansas, beat Kansas, we're talking about an exciting, you're going to get remembered for what you do in March. And if you can beat
Yep.
TCU, beat Kansas, possibly, play either Baylor or Tech, the two teams that swept you,
Yeah.
with a chance to knock one of those off, then, it turns into a different season. Right now, I agree with you. I think most of Longhorn Nation looks at the season and says, well, it was kind of a B minus.
Yeah.
But yet, they hit the 20-win mark by the end of February, and now they just got to go do something in the NCAA tournament, because clearly that's where Shaka Smart failed. I mean, even in winning Texas's first Big 12 tournament last year, they suffered one of the worst upsets of last year's NCAA tournament, getting knocked off by Abilene Christian, and that's how the Shaka Smart era ends. So anything
And the unusual circumstances in Kansas City with Kansas, not being able to play that semifinal game.
right, right. That's right. And so they end up playing Oklahoma State and beating them for that Big 12 tournament title. But nothing in the NCAA tournament win column the last 6 years under Shaka Smart. So anything in terms of a win in the NCAA tournament this year would be an upgrade. But I think people who are questioning Chris Beard, I'm like, no, he'll find the guys he needs to win in this program, and they have gotten tougher since that blowout loss to Baylor 80-63 back in mid-February. They've played better. They've played tougher. The wins at Oklahoma, West Virginia, gut check wins. And heck, the overtime game against Kansas over the weekend. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a tough, as tough a place to play as there is. And once again, Courtney Ramey, denying Ochai Abaji, and let's see what these guys can do. Obviously, the Trey Mitchell leave of absence is kind of a weird subset to this basketball season, but the team has stayed together and played hard, and like we said, played tougher down the stretch here, and not as if they would have been tougher. I think even if they had Trey Mitchell, they would have been playing tougher, but they've stayed together and kept going.
Yeah, and it's just I go back to, it's so interesting, the group he brought together, and if you look at what they did at their previous place, I mean, Marcus Carr goes off for 41 in a game again at Minnesota, but it's a totally different system there. I mean, Trey Mitchell's a 19-point per game. Christian Bishop plays at Creighton, where they love to just run them down the floor and score in the 90s. They all had to adjust to Chris Beard, but he had to gear a little bit towards them. I mean, Marcus Carr needs the ball in his hands. So I think it's just been a kind of a really difficult thing to do. And oh, by the way, in the Big 12, where you can't say there's a win that you just kind of roll your eyes and say, well, yeah, they had to win that game. Every game is a grinder, no matter if it's home or away. So I kind of go back to the memorable moments. They may be on the short end of, but they had so many other good wins that people just kind of discard because of the situation with Tech twice, and then the Baylor game here, all the hype. So that's what I'm saying. It's kind of a weird year for them all the way around.
Yeah, when you look at like if we were to pick an MVP of this team, who would you pick?
I think it's got to be Timmy Allen. I think he's been the most consistent. I think he's hit big shots. So and everybody else has had moments. I think if they were 24 and 7 or 24 and 6, it's probably Marcus Carr. But under the circumstances, I would go with Timmy Allen. I say, well, if they're 24 and 7, I think there's some more moments down the stretch where, Marcus Carr, and that's putting a lot on him in close ball games, but he's the type scorer at that position that can create things and do it down the stretch. But I would say, what do you think, Timmy Allen?
Yeah, I think Timmy Allen been the most consistent, and when my gosh, his performance against West Virginia was unbelievable,
Mm-hmm.
where he just kept
Mm-hmm.
attacking the basket, get into the free throw line, finished with 26 points in a one possession game. Would like to have seen that more from him, that aggressiveness against Texas Tech in both games, especially early. But it's a interesting mix, as you said, Roger, because you've got talented players who were on 500 or losing teams. They had to learn how to win, and they had to learn how to win with Chris Beard's toughness,
Right.
and that toughness grows in the program. I mean, we saw uh, at Texas Tech, he had okay first 2 years, and then boom, the third year he goes to the Elite Eight, fourth year he's in the national championship game. So, you see what he can do once that toughness, that culture builds in the program. I thought the maybe most important building block thing he accomplished this year was the relationship with the students, Roger, in building that fan base and getting those kids, inviting them down onto the floor after some games, having the students only game at Gregory Gym, um, really going out of his way to stress how important those students are, their presence at the basketball games.
Yeah, and he didn't shy away from being Chris Beard even after losses. And I think sometimes you'll see when things are going well, yeah, it's great. You get Matthew McConaughey on the roof of the Irwin Center and you do this and do that. But when things aren't going so well, you kind of go into your cave and do your media obligations. And then, but I like the fact that, win or lose, he was kind of the same guy as far as the big picture like you're talking about, and that's being inclusive. That's his little media marketing update before every news conference starts during the week. And so he's the same guy, and I think that's really important because it's real easy to be funny and glib and all that stuff when things are going well, but the fact that he's consistent with it, I think, says a lot. And then let's be honest, Chip, everything changes next year when they move into that new building because 8,000, sounds like 14,000 this year. And I'm sure Chris Beard wants way more than 8,000. But what I'm saying is I think that's going to be, such a boost to that program and even more so to Vic Schaefer in the women's program to get into that new building. And, that place, I'm guessing, I haven't been in, but smart people design those new arenas, and it's going to be, I would guess, really impressive and loud and all the things that they want out of it.
Yeah, and mercifully, the students are going to be, what, 3/4 of the way around the court, where they're going to be, sitting behind the Longhorns bench, behind the visitors bench, and their presence will be, instead of being in the end zones in the Irwin Center, the vacuous Irwin Center. That's the other thing I love, Roger, is that, we're saying goodbye to the Irwin Center, and so many people sort of despise the Irwin Center for its acoustics, for its design in terms of basketball, because it's not right on top of the court. It's, this big circle and the
Yeah,
courts in the middle, kind of awkward. But yeah, Moody is designed for basketball and for great acoustics for concerts and all that. But nonetheless, there were a lot of great moments in the Irwin Center. That
that's
leads
right. The moments were made the building. The building didn't make the building.
exactly. And that leads me into the women's basketball program, Roger. Vic Schaefer, Elite Eight in year one, did it with 6 players. Now he's got Rory Harmon, who's, sensational freshman point guard, and and he's gotten his everything out of those 3 seniors, Joanne Allen Taylor, Audrey Warren, Lauren Ebo, and Lauren Ebo's really picked it up and is playing her best basketball. Talk about the job you think Vic Schaefer has done in year 2.
Yeah, and I've had the fortune of doing a handful of games both years, filling in for Craig, and so I've gotten a little bit of a look behind the curtain. And he likes to say he coaches against ghosts, and man, that couldn't be more true. He is going at it every moment. And the thing about Vic is he's very even keel with the team. You might think just because of the his demeanor on the bench, you might think he's a yeller, he's a screamer, he's kind of all over the place. He's not. He's a teacher, and he is he's a film rat, and he's always looking for that edge. Writing things down. I think it's pretty amazing what he did last year with that team, and this year again. He's such a grinder. I was joking with somebody, all the little quips on Twitter about different programs, and you mess with the horns, you get the beard. Mess with the beard, get the horns. Fortune 500, Villanova, and to me, Vic is he grinds out grinders. I just think that's what he does with his programs when they're really good. So. I think he's going to get it rolling pretty good. And Saturday was really cool because there was 11,000 in the building, and those players loved that one great moment at the Irwin Center that they had with a really big crowd. And I think Vic's been frustrated. Last year, nothing you can do about it, but this year and kind of what it is, he's in a metropolitan area now. He's not in a small D1 town, so he's fighting a different battle, but. He gets those guys to play so hard, and Roy Harmon, you said it, Chip. I mean, she just gets banged around and just keeps on ticking.
Yeah, I mean, she reminds me of TJ Ford.
Yeah,
From
yeah,
just a calm, and she gets it, and her teammates. I just think they're going to have such a high ceiling with her. At the point guard position. And how about that? I mean, the attendance in that final home game against Oklahoma State, and Michael Huff, Vic Schaefer saying I'll give 10,000 to neighborhood Longhorns if we can get 10,000 in the building. Michael Huff saying I'll match it. They
yeah.
do it, and they're the top 10 team, right? They're the top 10 basketball team right now, and who knows what they can accomplish, because heck, they started the season off beating the defending champion Stanford Cardinal at Stanford.
Right. Yeah, and they'll get 2 at home. You would almost for certain. Well, 1 guaranteed. Got to get to that game to get to the Sweet 16. But yeah, I think they're just a hard matchup for teams. But their problem is they can go into some offensive funks, and if they do it against the wrong team, that spells trouble. So. We'll see. Kind of like the guys, they seem to have those droughts. But they're dangerous because they just play so hard, and a lot of teams just aren't used to seeing that kind of defense and that kind of pressure for 40 minutes.
People talk about Chris Beard and the stress on defense, and so his team doesn't have offense, but we've seen when you get the right point guard. Rick Barnes' team stressed defense. They didn't work on offense in practice. They were very similar to what Chris Beard is doing. When you get the right point guard running things and knowing how to set players up, the offense comes. It seems, that's been a struggle for the men. As you mentioned, there's some lulls for the women as well. Marcus Carr, I think, is more of a 2 guard as opposed to a point guard. And he's sort of had to, learn on the job, not learn on the job, but, trying to figure it all out. It's been up and down, and we'll see if they can get into that flow where their defense turns into offense, and they can build confidence. Obviously, they didn't hit shots against Baylor, 4 of 23 from 3-point range. And then they come right back at Kansas and hit 5 of 8 in the first half. So got to hit shots, right?
It's so funny you say that because I think the experts want to talk about so many other things than the most obvious thing sometimes, and that's yeah, you got to hit shots and you got to do it at a high level and you got to do it at an efficient level in this day and age. And there are those exceptions, but look at the best teams and they get up and down the floor and, high possession games, you got to be able to score. So, and that's both sides, that's men and women. That's exactly right. And that there's so much more stress on your defense when you're struggling. And then it gets into your head and coaches hate to say or hate to admit that if you're not hitting shots, it can get in your head at the other end of the floor. They love to think you can separate the two, but these guys are human. So you get a little frustrated when you can't hit shots, and you might let up a little bit on defense. So to me, that's the part of the game that's the most obvious, and sometimes everybody likes to tiptoe around it.
Well, let's take a quick break here with Roger Wallace, longtime color analyst on Longhorns broadcasts. We'll come back to talk a little baseball, little football, little spring football with Roger. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we'll roll on. And Roger, the Texas baseball team, #1 in the nation, they, off to an amazing start. They do suffer a setback in the Shriners Children's Hospital College Classic down in Houston, but they open with impressive wins over Tennessee and LSU. Then Tanner Witt is a late scratch against UCLA. They never quite get their traction in that game, lose that game, but they're still #1 in the country even after the loss. And early impressions of Texas baseball.
Well, start with the fact that they're living up to the hype, and I think that's a hard thing for any program, but especially Texas baseball's got hype whether they're 1 or 15, especially with a couple of trips to Omaha in the last several years. So to me, that's the start because, as you said, they lose to UCLA on Sunday, and they're not going to go undefeated. And they could have lost a game to Alabama. They could have lost a game to Corpus, but they didn't. They found ways to win those games. So they're living up to the hype, and the hype's based. You start with the starting pitching, and you mentioned it. Tanner Witt was a scratch. Lucas Gordon pitched pretty well, but they only get 5 hits, and one of them might still be going. We're not sure where that ball went. Ivan Melendez hit because you couldn't see it. But it was just one of those days, and David Pierce rested a couple of guys. Still solid performance, but you're right. I mean, Tennessee wanted to beat them really bad after what happened in Omaha. LSU, that was like a tournament game. The atmosphere there, and looked like a typical Friday, Saturday for this team with Pete Hansen and Tristan Stevens. So the concern is if it's anything, prolonged with Tanner Witt, but I think also David Pierce is establishing roles in the bullpen, and guys are stepping up, and offensively they've been pretty good too.
You get to be around, pregame, and you talk to David Pierce a lot. What are some of the more interesting backstories of the guys on this year's baseball team that stand out to you?
Well, I think a guy like Pete Hansen came in with so much talent, and he admits it, and that maybe he wasn't the hardest worker, and that was maybe something that put him over the hump. But when the season started, a lot of people, and I was one of them, and thought maybe because Tanner Witt might have the best stuff, maybe he's your Friday night guy, but they like Hansen in that role because he's a strike thrower. And sometimes we don't think about the little things that they think about. But when you talk about a weekend series and the bullpen, you want strike throwers early in the series, and then you can maybe afford to have a guy like Witt who's going to go deep into counts, throw higher volume pitches, maybe only go 6 innings and throw 95 pitches, and then you've got a fresher bullpen. So I think the way that David and Sean Allen manipulate that starting rotation is interesting, and then just finding guys that are willing to accept the moment. And one of the funny stories after I think it was Rice early in the season, first weekend, Jared Southard came in and struggled a little bit, and then he got out of it. And afterwards in the dugout, Pierce joked, "Yeah, I wanted to see what you do with first and second no outs," and he did a good job. Or he came in relief. I can't remember the exact situation, but again, told Jared, I wanted to see you do what you did. And you could tell he's kind of giving these guys confidence in what they do, even if they struggle a little bit. So, and he's a Vic, man. He's a grinder, and he uses a lot of information. And like, for instance, the second day against Alabama, that Saturday, miserable weather, he did not want to play a doubleheader. He wanted to get that game in at all costs. Because you got Silas Arjuan, one of the best catchers in the nation. You don't want to have him to catch 2 games in the same day, and didn't want Stevens to go out and throw a pitch, and then you have to shut it down because of weather, and then you lose him for the day. So that's why they pushed it. But just some of the little things that, it's the old joke. I always think of, Wilford Brimley. I remember him in The Firm. It's my job to worry about things you don't worry about. And sometimes when you're around these guys, you kind of hear the things they worry about that we don't even think about. And so it's cool to see that they're living up to the hype, and they're kind of embracing the hype.
Yeah, when you look at, last year, Tanner Witt's the guy coming out of the bullpen, and now it's Travis Staley.
Mm-hmm.
Travis Staley, early returns, impressive.
Yep, no doubt. And that's one of the things they wanted to see early on. And they're so again, it's like making shots in basketball. It's obvious. But how many college baseball games do we watch where guys really struggle finding the strike zone? And, Texas lives off walks. And then you get spoiled watching Texas pitchers because they don't walk a lot of batters. And that's the first thing he wants to see with those guys. He wants strike throwers. And, yeah, you love a guy that can go 98, but you don't want him to go 3-2 every time or walk 2 guys and then have to – work out of it. And then on the back end, you've got, cool hand Luke Aaron Nixon, who struggled a little bit with control, which is odd because that's kind of his strength, but got out of it. So he's just got a really nice mix, and he's establishing that middle part of the bullpen. You talked about that Tanner Witt had locked down last year, but obviously now he's the number 3 guy. Number 3, I say with an asterisk. He's the 3rd day starter on the weekend.
Yeah, and Andre Duplantier is a guy who's coming on, and a guy they're excited about just because of the mix of his fastball with his breaking ball, and we'll see, watch him gain confidence. And there was questions about the offense. How do you replace Zach Zubia and Mike Antico and Cam Williams? And so, you look at it now. You mentioned Ivan Melendez, but you're getting good production from Eric Kennedy and Doug Hodo and Austin Todd in his 6th year, Roger.
Amazing. The doctor.
Yeah.
Isn't that the joke in Tommy?
I mean, yeah, exactly. I give it to David Pierce. The guy nails it in his preseason predictions. Last year, I said, who's a player who could surprise? He said, I think Ivan Melendez will be one of the best hitters in the country. He was. I asked him the same question this year. He said, Silas Arjuan at the plate. He said he's a much better hitter than what he showed last year. Last year he batted 239, and already this year he's been, really impressive. All right, Roger, let's get to a little spring football. It kicks off on March 22nd. The spring game will be April 23rd, and the roster, has been turned over, it seems, with all these newcomers coming in. Give me, what are you most looking forward to, and what do you think fans need to keep in perspective?
You know what I'm going to say, right? It's the quarterback.
Got to have him.
You got to. I was thinking about this morning because I knew we were going to talk about this, and either you have a dynamic quarterback or you can just maul people. And, you think of Georgia, didn't have a dynamic quarterback. He turned out to be pretty good, but, not at that other level. But they maul people. You think of Alabama, they've had both. And then you think of other teams, and they've kind of had one or the other. Clemson, a mix, they could maul, but they always had a dynamic quarterback. So you've got to start with a dynamic quarterback, or else you're already behind the 8 ball, unless you're just so much physically superior. So I want to see. Now, I don't expect to see anything in the spring game that's going to tell me anything. But what are they saying, through the grind of spring practice, and what are the other guys saying about Quinn Ewers and Hudson Card? But to me, it's fair, unfair, but it's the way everybody thinks. What's the quarterback situation look like?
Like if you had to, and we'll come back to the quarterback in just a second, but the quarterback coach obviously is Steve Sarkisian. What do you make of year one under Steve Sarkisian?
Yeah, that's it was. I think of that Arkansas game kind of like I think of the Gonzaga game. It was kind of a hornet's nest, and that kind of set the tone. And then obviously, the Kansas game is the swing game. They win that game, they're going to a bowl game, and everything's a little bit different. But he had to manage the two quarterbacks, and I think he turned Casey Thompson into looks like he's going to be a starter now in the Big Ten. But Casey Thompson, we didn't know he could do this. Yeah, he did it for a half against Colorado, but he got a couple quick over the tops against Colorado, and they kind of checked out. So I don't know what to make other than they may have the best running back in the country. I think they're going to have a dynamic receiving core now. Well, I'm really curious to see if they can land O'Shawn Mathis because of all the transfers last year, all the guys that transferred that stepped right in. I don't think you could match his production of where he was compared to the guys that came in last year on the defensive side and what they brought. Even though like a guy like Ovie Oghoufo was good and Ray Thornton had his moments. But I mean, O'Shawn Mathis, come on, that guy can make a difference right away if they can land him. But obviously, if Bijan Robinson stays healthy and the offensive line's good, they're gonna be able to run the ball, and that's gonna make the quarterback better. But what's gonna happen on the defensive side of the ball, I think, is obviously a big key too.
Yeah, and you look at coming off a 5-7 season. It was a weird year. They get off to a nice start, 4-1. They absolutely blow out Texas Tech, which turns out to be a bowl team, and then have those three heartbreakers where they've got big double-digit leads over Oklahoma State, and Baylor, lose those games, and then it becomes a psychological thing for the team. They end up with that long losing streak, longest since 1956, and finish 5-7. But how about this offseason? I mean, from the top 5 recruiting class where you're getting all these offensive and defensive linemen and Quinn Ewers, you bring in Gary Patterson. Your thoughts on, the offseason for the Longhorns?
Yeah, and obviously impressive. And Sark said you got to get bigger. You got to get big guys, and that's what they did. Now, what are they going to do on the field? And I think you and I have been here long enough to realize that the offseason, it's great to talk about. It's a lot of fun, but man, it comes down to 12 Saturdays, and maybe I'm just getting old and cynical and thinking that, all the lip service and all the talk, show me the games and show me what's going to happen. But it seems like he's put a lot of things in place that are going to really help. I just love the fact that he's going to have Gary Patterson's ear on the defensive side of the ball. I think that can only help. But man, you got Alabama sitting there in week 2. You got a pretty good team early on too in UTSA. So again, we can talk till we're blue in the face, but they can't get to the conference undefeated. When's the last time they played a full conference schedule or a full non-conference? Obviously the COVID year, they just had one non-conference game, but that they can't get to the Big 12 undefeated. That, to me, that's goal number 1. And that's going to be really tough this year with Alabama.
Yeah. I don't think we haven't talked to you since, Texas and Oklahoma announced they were going to the SEC last summer. Your thoughts on that impending move whenever it comes, and if you have any insight into that?
I don't have any insight. I think it's funny because it was like a tidal wave for about 5 days in July. I was just off vacation, when the bomb dropped. And then, it was crazy. And then all of a sudden, okay, they're going to the SEC. And then every coach had to speak for the first time about it. And of course, they didn't say anything because, they got to worry about the now. And then it's kind of gone quiet. And there's been more noise about the Big 12 and what they're doing than about the SEC and what they're doing with Texas and Oklahoma. We don't know what a schedule is going to look like. We don't know what divisions are going to look like. We don't know if they're going to do pods. So now we know who's coming into the Big 12, and we know Texas and Oklahoma might be playing against some of those teams depending on when it happens. But I don't know. I understand they have to look, way down the road, and they think that's the best move. I think, the Big 12 schools now are going, all right, we know we've got a Power 5 conference. It may not have Texas and Oklahoma, but I think, the end is not here. We're not going D3 in Lubbock. We're fine. We're going to have a place to play. And so I think they're stable while everybody's wondering what's the SEC going to look like when these two schools finally get there. It's kind of flipped a little bit, and all the talks about, the Big 12 figuring it out. Now the SEC and Texas and OU have to figure out when all that happens. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think Lincoln Riley leaving Oklahoma is a huge deal. I mean, we've got to see what Brent Venables is as a head coach. If you ask most of the people in the SEC, I bet they'd say, well, Oklahoma is maybe SEC ready under Lincoln Riley. I don't know if they think that now. And obviously Texas is not SEC ready. They've got a ways to go. I had one source, one high level UT source say, well, maybe we need a couple years to get to where we need to be in terms of SEC ready football if Texas can't make the move until 2024. So it's fascinating because you can't look at Lincoln Riley's move to USC in any other way than
path of least resistance.
Right. I don't think he wanted to make that move. And so now he's out in the, at USC, where he's the biggest brand in that conference, and will have all the resources he needs to try and build that thing back to where they've been in the past. But I think it's fascinating that we don't have an idea yet how the SEC is going to divide itself up. Like you mentioned, is it going to be divisions? Is it going to be pods? Because that will affect scheduling, and that's a huge part of this puzzle. So looking forward to getting some more answers. And then it's interesting that Texas puts out some hype videos over the last few days, with the SEC logo on it, but no year or no indication of when. So they're starting to, build the drum beat, but how long is that drum beat going to go on? So, I'm looking forward to the scheduling, Roger. Once they get into the SEC, it's going to be incredible, entertainment and high level interest.
Right. And I get the part about, the people never really got excited about a home Big 12 schedule. So then you also had to lean on, what non-conference, and they've done a great job of getting the high profile non-conference home and homes. But, when you play OU in Dallas every year, that's off the table. Then and it has nothing to do with how good teams are. It's strictly what excites you when you look at a schedule and you see those names. And that's all going to change with the SEC schools. And not to say that those schools couldn't go into Waco or, in Manhattan when they've got it rolling, or, pick a Big 12 school and lose. It's just the mind says, oh, wow, Auburn's coming, And so in the short term, I think that's going to be a huge thing. And then see if they just settle in, and then they just kind of like the Big 12. We were both around when the Southwest Conference turned into the Big 12, and it was a big deal. And then all of a sudden it was the Big 12. So, how many years before it's just, okay, Texas and OU are part of the SEC.
Right. Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. What okay, last thing, Roger, when you look at kind of the fan perspective, what do you think are realistic expectations for Texas football? And I don't even know if realistic expectations exist
Yeah,
when it comes
is
to,
that an oxymoron?
but for year two, based on what you know now, you're way too early.
Yeah,
Uh, expectations for
I don't
2022.
think I think you have to put expectations at competing for a spot in the Big 12 championship game as realistic, not a pipe dream. So I think they should be right there at the end of November trying to get a spot in Arlington. I think that's realistic. Now, big picture, national championship playoff. I don't know. I got to see the guy taking snaps. Um, this program isn't one of those programs yet, and I know that's what Sark wants it to be, where it's this conversation's not happening because he did the job. And I remember you for a million years when you covered the Cowboys beating the drum for Bill Parcells. You start on the inside and then you work your way out. Big guys then work your way out. You've always talked to me about that from your days covering the Cowboys. So until they get there, the smaller guys might be the difference makers, and so I got to see the quarterback play this fall.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, Roger. And listen, I always love talking Longhorn athletics with our man Roger Wallace.
This is fun, Chip, because this is like a week's worth of sportscast for me on one shot here with you.
Hey, anytime, Roger.
Right
You
on,
just let me know when you
right
got some
on.
stuff you want to
That's
get out there, when
get
you want to chat
long-winded.
about. Yo, we'll clear the decks for you, my man.
I keep waiting to hear in my ear. Okay, wrap it up.
Hey, no way. No wrapping it up here, but we appreciate it so much, Roger. You do a great job on those Longhorn broadcasts, and of course, 27 years at KXAN. Keep up the good work, my man. Appreciate your time.
Always a pleasure, Chip. Thanks.
All right. For Roger Wallace, I am Chip Brown. Thanks so much for listening to the Flagship podcast. We'll see you over at horns247.com. And until next time, stay safe and keep the faith.